Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Kaylin Hogan, the author of the book Republic of Shame, which is out now in paperback, published by Penguin. The book is about a long legacy of religious-run institutions in Ireland that operated for many, many years since the beginning of the state and even before, up until as recent as 2006 was the last mother and baby home institution that closed. I started reporting this book in 2017, a few years after the marriage equality referendum in Ireland, and looking ahead to the repeal referendum. It was a time where there was a discourse happening around the way that Ireland treated unmarried women and pregnant women in this country. And many people were starting to break silences around the shame that was imposed on women during that time. I spent more than a year speaking with survivors of these institutions. Thousands of women were sent to give birth in secret, and many were separated from their children. Thousands of children were adopted through the religious institutions and agencies, and thousands of children died in these institutions. I think many of us first heard about the mother and baby home institutions after the news broke about Tuam, where more than 800 children died, and where the remains of children were recently discovered in sewage chambers on the grounds of the institution run by the Bon Secours. I'm very honored and glad to have this wonderful group of women here tonight to read from the book, and we'll be discussing some of their experiences as well. We have Rosemary Addisor, who is a founder and CEO of the Association of Mixed Race Irish. Before that, she had a 30-year successful career as a senior manager in social housing. We have Siobhan McSweeney, who is an Irish actor originally from Cork, and her screen work includes Collateral, London Irish, and of course she plays Sister Michael in Derry Girls. Noelle Brown is a playwright, actor, and adoption rights activist. Her play Postscript, which she both wrote and performed in, is about her experience of tracing her birth parents. And we also have Jess Kavanagh, who is a singer and poet, and she wrote a recent Irish Times article about the legacy of these institutions and how it impacted her own family as a mixed race Irish woman. This event is in support of the Mixed Race Irish Association of Mixed Race Irish, and we have a great lineup of speakers today. So without further ado, Noelle Brown will be speaking first, reading from Republic of Shame and speaking about her own experience.
In the late 1990s, a midwife called June Goulding published a memoir about her experiences working in Besport in 1951 and 1952. She described how women were expected to work for up to 3 years in the home, but if their family were able to pay £100, a fortune at the time, to have the baby adopted, they could leave after 10 days. Goulding wrote that Cork Corporation paid the convent £1 per mother and 2 shillings 6 pence per baby per week. No girl could keep her baby or go home with her baby, no matter what her family paid, Goulding wrote. She described the women doing heavy work in the laundry, clipping the grass of the grounds by hand on their knees, and being made to tar the driveway. She recalled baptizing a stillborn baby who was buried in a patch of ground that had a cement crucifix 2 feet high. She depicted the nuns as callous and tight with money, holding back on using the expensive catgut for stitches when women tore during delivery. One girl was given anaesthetic during childbirth, but only because she paid extra. The doctor who came to administer the anaesthetic told Goulding he had failed the nun twice in her midwifery final. Carmel Cantwell, who lives in Cork, used to help organise the annual commemoration at Besport. When I met her in Cork, she told me the story of her mother, whom she asked me to call Bridget. Bridget was born out of wedlock in a county home in Cashel. Her grandparents raised her in Tipperary, along with 11 other siblings, who were actually her uncles and aunts. She left school at 13 and at 14 started working in a convent in Kilkenny, encouraged by the nuns to become a postulant. At 16, when she and other postulants were getting ready to be sent as missionaries to Australia, she needed her birth certificate to get a passport. The nuns told her that she would not be allowed to enter the Sisters of Charity because she was illegitimate. A year later, at 17, while working as a domestic in Tipperary, Bridget became pregnant out of wedlock herself. She fled to England, where she confessed to a priest. He arranged for the Crusade of Rescue in London to send her back to Ireland. Once she stepped through the door of Besport, her clothes were taken from her, along with her money and her savings book, and she was put to work. Her son William was born in 1960. After giving birth, Bridget became ill when the site of an injection on her buttock got infected. After 3 days, William too became sick. She remembered one nun accusing another of using an unsterilised needle on the baby. William was sent to St. Finbarr's Hospital then. Carmel told me Bridget was told matter-of-factly, "Your baby died, and he's already buried." Bridget left Besport within a week, put on a boat back to England. She tried to commit suicide 3 times. For 36 years, she never told anyone about her son. "I was the first person," said Carmel. In 1995, Bridget went to Besport to ask the nuns for information. They sat her down and took out a file and told her William was buried in the nuns' cemetery. Sister Sarto then took Bridget down to the graveyard, not letting her come inside the gate, and tapped her foot against a patch of the grass. "Your baby's buried there," Sister Sarto said. Bridget asked if they could place a plaque, but the nun told her no, only a plain wooden cross. Carmel remembered her mother coming back to her own home in Cork that day and collapsing in sobs on the kitchen floor. It was then that Bridget told her the whole story. In 2014, Carmel told me she asked Thomas Quigley if he would ask the nuns to check the burial ledger for William. She believed the nuns must have some records of burials, and there were rumours of a ledger. Quigley came back to her after consulting with the nuns and told her to check with O'Connor's funeral directors on Shandon Street or the city archives. Carmel found the record of William's death, which listed the causes as renal abscess and septicemia, but she could find no record of his burial. She and her mother put a small headstone over the spot Sister Sarto had indicated in the Besport cemetery. I chose that extract from the chapter In the Shadow of the Stone Folly because I was born and adopted from Besport in the 60s. And I just want to talk a little bit tonight because firstly to say congratulations to Caelan because she's written an extraordinary book and done this country a great service, particularly adopted people and their birth mothers. So in 2002, I decided to search for my birth family. Basically, I wanted medical information, I wanted my birth cert, I wanted birth information, things that most people in Ireland just take for granted. You can have them. And naively, I thought that I could have those things really easily. It would take a phone call, maybe a few letters. But my first call was to the Southern Health Board in Cork, where I got an icy nun who told me that I couldn't have any information and I had no right to my file or any information about my birth. So that was a bit of a shock because I was an Irish citizen and I thought, you know, this is it. We just get the information. It's 2002. Those were the dark days and now it's all changed. So I stepped away from it for a couple of months and then I went back to Bernardo's, to the post-adoption services. And I told them my story. I got the courage up, and it takes a lot of courage and a lot of emotional strength to make any of these calls and ask for information. And Bernardo's weighed in and got me information. They took the nun to task and I got my birth mother's information. She'd passed away, sadly. She was given contaminated blood in the 1990s and died at 47. But during that time, the information had been compiled on a typed up piece of paper. There was a file, but I was not going to be given that. So I got a page and a half of typed details. And it was typed up by Sister Sarto, who's mentioned in the piece that I just read there. And she is notorious in terms of the effect that she's had on adoptees, anyone born in Besport or given birth in Besport. And at that time in 2002, she decided to alter information on my form, which I didn't know I'd still be trying to make sense of 18 years later. She stated that my birth father's name and address wasn't recorded. She wrote no other details recorded. She changed his physical description. She got my birth date wrong, loads of discrepancies. So I took that as real. There was no record of my father. So I met my birth family. I managed to meet uncles and aunts and cousins and everything else. And then I wrote off and I wrote a play with a friend of mine, Michelle Forbes, in 2012. But you get so far with talking to people about their memories. The information I had was a page and a half of sparse details. I had no information really about what went on in Besport. I had no information about my time in Besport, the basic things like, your birth weight, the time you were born, all the little details that people take for granted. So it wouldn't go away. So I kept, contacting when the files were handed over to TUSLA, I think it was in 2012, I kept contacting, asking for information, and also became an activist around adoption rights when I realized just how much I was being denied and the way I was being treated for being born in a mother and baby home. I also couldn't access my original birth cert. When I had traced my mother's family, I rang to see if I could have my birth cert, and I was told no. So what I did was I went in, used my birth name, and I got it that way, which was very nervous making, to say the least. It was absolutely terrifying, but I got it. So I kept going back and forward to TUSLA going, could I have my file? Could I have my file? And I was getting no response, just letters. I did the GDPR thing going, can you give my access to information? No. And then I started to question whether I was a subject of vaccine trials while I was in Besport, because I'd met people who were there around the same time as me with scars in their bodies. And I wondered, and there were some health issues when I had been adopted early on. And I wanted to know what went on, all very emotive stuff. So I kept pushing. In 2017, I went back to them again, asking questions around the, wanting my file. And I was told that there was nothing there. Then eventually, to surreptitious means, I got my file. And I had a sense that all the information I needed would be on it. And what I got was a pile of papers with, obviously pages missing because the numbers didn't correlate, and a large amount of Tipex on any important information or any emotional information that I needed to understand my identity, where I came from. And it was absolutely horrible. Shortly after that, this was 2017, I was still backwards and forwards with TUSLA, trying to get more information. And I did a 13-minute interview on The Late Late Show, where I spoke about the difficulties for adopted people around getting information and their birth certs and medical information, birth information. 4 days later, I got a call from TUSLA, the same woman I'd been dealing with, to say, oh, we actually do have your father's name and address. So it was a bit of a shock and I was upset. It takes a lot of, as I said, emotional courage and strength to go down these roads. It's very, very difficult. But she said, and I said, can I have it? And she said, no, we can't give it to you. You'll have to go on a 2.5-year waiting list. And after that, we will write to him on your behalf. So I was left with that again. Kept writing, kept asking, nothing. And I was really distressed by it, to know that. The last conversation I had with this woman was about the fact that that this stranger had that information in front of her. And I had been lied to since 2002. I also said to her that day, I said, the other bit of information I don't have, because it's Tipex for some reason, I said, what color were my birth mother's eyes? And she became impatient and she said, oh, do you not know that already? And I said, no, it's the one question I haven't asked her birth family. Can you tell me the color of her eyes? And something kind of broke in me that day, and I decided that I wasn't going to deal with them anymore. I would just leave it. So I stepped away and continued with the activism to try and, having met other people in similar situations, and completely gobsmacked that in a country that was now talking about equality and choice that adopted people neither had choice or equality. So at the end of last year, 2019, I decided to look into DNA testing on the websites that are popular, and I knew a lot of adopted people had done that. Again, kind of had to find the courage to do it, to pay €100 for something that was on a piece of paper that the state information that the state agency had that they Tipex out, and I struggled with that, and then eventually I did it, and within 6 weeks I had a match, and there was a name came up, a birth aunt, and I wrote to her, and luckily she was someone who understood my predicament, and I met her, and I've been in touch with her, and they've been extraordinary. But unfortunately, my birth father died in 2016, so that was really hard, because if I didn't have had this information from 2002 up until 2016, I would have had the choice whether to contact him or not. I mightn't have, but I would have had the choice as his daughter, as his biological daughter. So you can see I'm angry and upset. This is how I've lived the last 18 years, trying to piece things together. Thankfully, my journey's over. I have an ending, and there is some relief in that. It's not the ending I wanted, but I have an ending. I don't know where I go from here with this, but I have, as much information as I can get. Um, there's no further I can go. I don't have to deal with TUSLA anymore. But ironically, 3 weeks ago, I got an email from TUSLA to say that my 2.5 years was up, and now they were ready to search on my behalf. I wrote a stinker of an email back, understandably, telling them what they'd put me through for the last 18 years and how I did not want any contact for them. So they got back again to say, well, if you'd like to talk to us, obviously I won't be getting back to them. So that's an outline of my story, of trying to trace my birth family. As I said, things that people take for granted, knowing the colour of your mother's eyes, knowing your medical history. It's a question you get asked every time you go to a doctor. Is there any family history of? And every single time I've had to say, I have no information. I think it's appalling what's going on in this country. I am one adopted person. I've reached the end of my journey, thank God. It's not the way I wanted it. And I'm going to move on now. I'm emotional tonight because it's still quite raw. It's only just happened to me. And I just wanted to tell people what it's like, because I don't think non-adopted people know. The birth cert issue is a huge issue, and it needs to be sorted. We deserve our information. There is a sense that we are, as families, I don't think any other families in Ireland are being dictated to by the state. We are being infantilized. We are not allowed to make our own decisions. There is a perception that people will go knocking on doors if we have that information. What we are asking for is choice and equality around our identities, and that we exist, and that we were born on this day at this time. Our names may have been changed, but it doesn't change who we are. We have our identities, and it needs to be acknowledged. And I'm ashamed of this country that we are still being treated like this. I'm ashamed that there are 800 babies scattered on the grounds of Besport, only 64 accounted for. I'm ashamed of the 796 babies in Tuam and Seanras Abbey and Castle Pollard. And something has to give. I salute Kaylin Hogan, as I've said, for writing this book and telling those stories. It's a really, really important book, and I want to congratulate her and to thank her for having me here tonight. Thank you.
What's happened? Hi, Kaylin.
Hi, Rosemary. Wonderful to have you with us. Thanks so much for joining.
I don't know how I follow that. Nolan's story is full of pain even now, and she's an amazing lady for just opening her voice, because it takes a lot to just open your throat and say what's on your mind. And I can still hear her pain because she was denied basic information about who she might possibly be. It's like, Nolan, thank you, sweetie. Thank you. I hear you. I hear you.
Rosemary, it's really wonderful to have you with us. And I think, it is shocking that some of us are only learning about these institutions for the first time. So many people never realized what happened behind these walls, or sort of chose not to know. And I think it's because of survivors like yourself speaking out about your own experiences that we are now realizing the long legacy of this system. You're a survivor of more than one of these institutions. As both a child, you spent 10 years in an industrial school in Ireland, and you also were in an institution as a mother as well. So
I spent 6 years in a mother and baby home as well.
before that, so mother and baby home, industrial school, and then back to a mother and baby home. And this is something that I learned through writing the book, that it can be generational, the impact. It's not just one institution, it's a network of institutions. Tell us a little bit about your experience of breaking that silence around what you experienced in the institutions, and how important it was to break that silence.
It was really hard because I had a successful career in the UK, and I was struggling. I was really, really struggling, and I didn't understand what was going on. And my daughter used to say to me that, the problem with you, Mom, is that you're Irish and you don't know how. And it's very difficult, to be honest with you, to even speak about it. But slowly I recognized throughout all the travails of my existence, I'd never come to grips with the with my origins, quite frankly. My origins in mother and baby homes, Irish industrial schools, and I needed to touch base with that, and it was incredibly difficult because it forced me, the recognition that I was a very unprivileged part of this system of mother and baby homes, industrial schools, Magdalene laundry complexes. I was at the bottom of the heap, and it's taken me a good 6 years to come to terms with the reality of my birth, my experience. And the thing is, we can all say, all right, we're going to reinvent ourselves. We're going to get on with life. We're going to do all this good stuff. But actually, until you first of all deal with the reality of your childhood, you're screwed. And that's what I did, sweetie. And it was bloody hard. It was bloody hard because I'd spent 40 years in the UK ignoring anybody who was Irish, because it was, if you're Irish, you're the devil. I've been proven wrong, thankfully. I've been proven wrong.
And you made a huge impact. I mean, you went on the Late Late, and you spoke about the abuse, the racial abuse within the institutions, and I think that empowered a lot of people to speak about their own experience.
I'm hoping so. I'm hoping so. But actually, I want to applaud you and laud you on your book, The Republic of Shame, because you know what, Kaylin, what you managed to do? You managed to humanize the story of Nolan, myself, and thousands of others. That is your gift to us. Although you weren't brought up in these institutions, you have instinctively understood the damage they did to thousands and thousands of women and also men who were born in these institutions. So I want everybody to buy this book. It is a book that needs to be on the Irish curriculum. It is easy to absorb. You don't have to have a degree. The language is warm, it's cozy. I need you all to read, look for Source, The Republic of Shame by Kaylin, because it is a brilliant book. It will take you, if you're really, really bored and nothing to do, it will take you 2 hours to get through it. But what it will give you is a definitive understanding of the network of Irish industrial schools, mother and baby homes, and the Magdalen Laundry. So sorry, Kaylin, I kind of hijacked this
You're
bit.
definitely embarrassing me here. I don't do well with
It's so brilliant, and I want
but
this
I think
Republic of Shame, everybody, by Kaylin Hogan. Get it?
thank you,
All right.
Rosemary. And do, I mean, please, I think, look up the work that the Association of Mixed Race Irish is doing. But I wanted to talk to you also about the Commission of Investigation, which started in
Yes.
2015, and we are still waiting more than 5 years later for answers. And you and fellow members of AMRI fought very hard to ensure that racial discrimination, the systemic racial discrimination within the institutions, is being investigated. Obviously, we're still waiting for answers on that, but what are you hoping that the report can tell us, and what do you think needs to be done once that is released, or before that is released? What can we do to support survivors, and what do you think is important for us to realize about that systemic discrimination?
You know what? I live in a state of hope. I don't know whether the commission will find in our favor. I don't, because we are an unwritten note piece of Irish histories. We were absolutely airbrushed from the Ryan Report and survivor narratives, and all we've done is say, "Oh, what about us? What about us?" I don't know what they're going to do. I hope, following the third event, that's the Commission for the Examination of Racial Discrimination, and we went there last December, and they agreed with us. They kind of said, if you're not seen, you're not heard. And from my community in these institutions, we absolutely weren't seen. We were put in the defect ward along with the severely mentally disabled and the severely disabled and mentally challenged. So, what do I hope? Um, I hope the Commission just acknowledges that um, Ireland does have a case to answer, which CERD has already acknowledged that. They've already said, if you're not seen, you're not heard. We've never been seen. We've never been heard. And I would like the commission to inquire into mother and baby homes to just go, okay, we see you, we hear you. As to what we want afterwards, um, we would like anti-racism laws, in particular hate speech laws, because it's not just about race. It's about anybody who is different from the normal dictate of Irish married with 2.5 children. That's not it. It is about, the thing is, in Ireland, it's completely okay to voice your racism. It's okay. I can be in Dublin and somebody just call me nigger, 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 nigger. I have no protection. And it's not just people of color here. It is if you're LGBTQ plus. It is if you are disabled. Anybody can step up to you and just throw the vilest of insults in your direction. And they call it free speech. And okay, I understand free speech. I understand you have a right to your free speech, but I also have have a right to just slap you down. Legally, that is not in place. So where do I want to go? I want hate speech legislation. I want an education in Irish schools, not juniors, which is what the Department of Justice said, because I'm part of the collaborative forum. I hope I'm not talking too much, Kaylin. I'm part of the collaborative forum. One of the things that we agreed as a forum was that the hidden history of mother and baby homes, industrial schools, Magdalen laundry ought to be in the Irish curriculum. And what did the Department of Justice say? They went, oh, well, no, this is far too cruel for the young minds of Irish children. And we were going, well, we weren't thinking of young children. We're thinking of children at the intercert and leaving cert. And immediately they began to shut us down. And now you have the retention of records bill. So while we're saying it's really important that uh, uh, our history, and it's not just a mixed race Irish, but it's all children dispossessed by the Irish state, hand in hand with the Irish government. It is important that our history is part of Irish history, just like we all grew up with the 1916 blood cult revolution. Our history needs to be part of that. And the Department of Justice going, well, no, um, let's hide your history for the next 75 years.
And this is the bill that is attempting to seal for 75 years the records from the Commission of Inquiry into Child Abuse. So within the industrial schools, within religious run institutions, and that would be sealing that information for generations. And I think, as Noelle has said, access to information is just so important. And we had actually an event in Dublin a few years ago called Dublin Honours Magdalenes, and spoke to many of the survivors of the Magdalene laundries and institutions. Some of them were mothers themselves who had been sent from mother and baby home institutions. And many of these women told me, what is really important to us is that this is not repeated, that we don't repeat what was done, and also that our lived experience and our stories are taught in schools, that people understand what happened. And I think language is, as you said, is very powerful and can be extremely, hurtful. And the women that were sent to these institutions were called offenders by church and state. They were called penitents. I've seen documents from local authorities and, from the state that call these women penitents and offenders. So that is how they were seen. And I think it is not something that I definitely learned about in any depth in school. And I think people think sometimes that speaking about their experience is cathartic as well. And as a journalist, I think I've become very aware that revisiting that trauma is actually extremely difficult and exhausting and painful for survivors. And so survivors do that for a reason. It's not cathartic for them necessarily. It really is so that people understand, and so that this history is not repeated.
It is, and it's about the survivors. It's not just about opening our voices, our throats, which have been sealed shut for generations. It is about saying, this is our history. This is your history as much as it is mine. So the idea that governments, the Irish government, is hoping to yet again shut us up. Because the thing about this whole industrial school complex is that every county had a mother and baby home and an industrial school. Society colluded with the Catholic Church and the Irish state to remove its unwanted pregnant women. And think about it. The only crime these women committed was having a baby. That's the only crime. And if you went in, and there was a whole, I don't know, graph. And if you were a first time mother who committed a crime, you could go into the mother and baby home, which was considered less dangerous than the county homes. And if you went into a county home, you were a mother who had had multiple babies outside wedlock. And those children, many of those children, Kayleen, were criminalized from day one. Thousands went through the courts, Irish courts, and sentenced to industrial schools. This is not about mixed race Irish, travelers, although we were the bottom of the heap. It's not about that. It is about a whole society that criminalized young Irish mothers who weren't even aware of the facts of life, because that was whole Catholicism. Don't teach your girls about the facts of life. And thousands of us fell prey to the biggest sin, which was to conceive, you know?
And that
Sorry,
it's
I'm
no,
emotional.
these,
I'm
I mean,
emotional.
I think that again is something that people don't realize, is that, you know, many young women who grew up in the industrial schools, and as soon as they left, I spoke to so many people who became pregnant very shortly after leaving because they had no education about their own bodies and it was seen as sinful. And so they left with no knowledge of how to protect themselves or sex or of their own bodies. And if they became pregnant, were often then put back into another religious run institution and separated from
And,
their
and
child.
the cycle continues. Keep them in ignorance. They get up the daft. They go back into mother and baby homes, or they will go into medical laundries. You know, it was a baby trafficking system. You know, and I have nothing but respect and awe and love for those children who are trafficked, because that's the only way you can describe it. You know, it was like you get these childless Irish couples, and they would go into this mother and baby home, and it would be like, yeah, I like her. No, 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 I like him. No, 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 I like him. It was a dog in the pound moment. It was a puppy in the pound. And these young children were put into the care of people who were never vetted. It was all about the relationship with the parish priest. That was it. If the parish priest signed you off as a good Catholic couple with a clean kitchen, hey ho, here's a baby. And I know from speaking to a lot of adopted people, that wasn't always brilliant. It wasn't always brilliant. And I'm absolutely in favor of the adult adopted people having access to their records pre-adoption, warts and all. Yeah, you know, some of the moms mightn't have been so great. Some were great. Some were great. And like the people like Noelle, they absolutely have a right to their personal history. The thing is, the only reason I have my father's name was that I was born in Belfast, part of the United Kingdom. That's the only reason. So I know my name is Rosemary Amiges Adassa because that was on my birth certificate. Go to the Republic of Ireland, My father's name was just left off. It's like he didn't exist. He didn't exist. And that was the single biggest, egregious crime the Irish state gave to people in Irish institutions. They absolutely refused to acknowledge their fathers. Many fathers wanted them. Not everybody was a fly by night. Many fathers wanted their babies, but they couldn't have access because they didn't exist under the Irish Constitution. Sorry. I'm
No,
passionate.
I'm actually the other women are speaking in the chat, and they're talking about the daughters of the dash, because on the birth cert, often where the father's name should be, there's only a dash. So the daughters of the dash, or the children of the dash.
Yeah,
Thank you, Rosemary. It is really an honor to have you speak tonight, and thank you so much for joining us and doing the important work that you do.
Thank you, Kaylin. This is a book you guys all need to get. That's all I will say. It is brilliant, it is kind, it is compassionate, and coming from somebody who did not go through the Republic of Shame. It's your history too. Thank you, Kaylin. Thank you.
Hello. I'm not meant to speak before I read. I asked not to speak before I read, but I think I just have to just say something incredibly quick, which is a huge, huge, huge thank you to Rosemary and Noelle and to Caolan tonight as well. I'm absolutely and utterly honoured to be here. I'm so moved, beyond moved. So apologies. This is a chapter called Rose from Republic of Shame. Many of the women who gave birth in Tuam are no longer alive to speak about what happened there, and many went to their graves never telling a soul. Rosaleen McKinney is 81 years old and still very much alive in the flesh and blood. One of 8 siblings, she was 17 years old, living on the family farm in Dunmore, a rural area of Galway, when crippling pain coursed through her body and her mother realised that she was in labour. She had kept the pregnancy secret, not sure what was happening to her own body. At 13, she had left the school to work at the farm. Girls were taught about the virgin birth, but not about sex or pregnancy. The local doctor was summoned and drove Rose not to a local hospital, but to the mother and baby home in Tuam. She spent a year there and was allowed to hold her son only during feeding. An archivist on Nuns Island in Galway found Rose's name in the manager's orders for the Tuam home. Just over a year after Rose's son was born, her family began paying 30 shillings a month maintenance for the boy to remain there. Rose never knew about these payments to an institution where conditions were so poor. There was no record to say how long her son remained. Rose told me he was fostered out after a few years. 2 years after she gave birth to her son, Rose became pregnant again. Her boyfriend came to the farm to ask her hand in marriage, happy to be starting a family. But Rose's parents refused. They brought me back, she said, referring to Tuam. You had no choice in these things. She gave birth to a daughter and remained in the institution, washing clothes and cleaning floors for the nuns. I wanted to keep her, she said. I wanted to keep my son as well. She was older this time, with a man who wanted to marry her, which gave her hope that they could take her daughter home. The nuns even allowed her boyfriend to visit, but they would not allow him to see his daughter. One day, her baby was gone. She doesn't remember signing any consent. The nuns sent Rose to the Magdalen Laundry in Galway, a place she described as the most vicious place you could ever live. She washed clothes from first thing in the morning until 10 at night, sleeping in a dormitory with 40 other women. Many had also given birth to children in the institutions. A nun once hit her so hard across the face that she permanently lost hearing in one ear. She met a girl she went to school with in the laundry, a novice with the Mercy Sisters. Me and her were like that, she laughed, winding her middle finger around her index, squeezing them tightly. Now they were segregated into different classes of women. A celibate bride of Christ and a repeat offender. After a few years in the laundry, Rose escaped one night, climbing over the roof with another girl and over the high outside wall. She returned to the family farm on foot. The nuns came down to get me back, she said. A local Garda sergeant was also with them. But her siblings were at home and refused to let Rose be taken back. I had my dog Prince with me, growling, she winked at me. They had to run. When she applied to the Sisters of Mercy for her records, they sent back a scan of a single entry in their register, the only record they had on her. There was nothing to show how long she had stayed at the laundry or whether she had any medical care while there. There was no record of when she left. The entry in the admissions register, in spider-like cursive, noted her name, her age as 22, her address, simply June. It was dated 16th of June, 1959. By whom sent? Sister Patrick. And what looked like Horatius or Loratus in tune. Under cause, the reason Rose was being sent to the laundry, 2 words were written. Penitent, twice. Thanks.
Hi guys, it's an absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for Rosemary. Thank you for Kaylin for inviting me today, and thank you to Noelle and to Siobhan too. This is a poem that I wrote. I wrote this poem to perform at the first book launch, the hardback of Republic of Shame, and I'd like to share it with you today. And this poem is called 4 Girls in Blue. 4 girls in blue faced 4 girls more, and they shifted their shoes on a parquet floor. We ditched our classes, a laborious tune to think of our future in assembly room. 2 girls spoke of hostels where you go hang with boys. 2 spoke of old women, left with old toys. Now, I wanted the fields where I got up to no good, not a place with the old ones, where Hyde Park stood. The girls said it's basically like hanging out with your friends. The old women are confused and they think they're young again. If you bring them your makeup, your magazines and games, they think they're like you. They think they're the same. Now, I was cursed with the youth in my family. We're crippled with young deaths around me. I knew no elderly people. When I was 15, I thought maybe it's normal to believe you're a teenager. It's elderly turmoil. That haunted me. And the story hung on from 15 to 33, a story 18 years strong. You see, I believe we are cells, a network of ancestral info, and the story hit the bank of my brain and didn't let go. Like stories of my nana working as a cook in a laundry where she smuggled in booze, cigarettes, and maybe money. My nana who would stand up to a nun's violent throttle. She kept St. Bernadette's halo on a blue water bottle. She ran away from home before the church bells sang to the Isle of Man with a motorbike gang. Her sister Kay moved to England so she'd be a nurse and dated a black man. To our family, she was cursed. With a child unwanted, a child out of wedlock, she'd be sent to the country, developmental deadlock. Even now, I have nightmares of being abandoned alone in some woods, this pain transcended. When I was 13, I found my mother's birth cert. And I read out my grandmother's name. My mom's voice, Kurt, said, "Just have a fucking think for a second. What is Kathleen short for? Think of a nickname. What are you staring at me for?" Kathy, Maybe I was bashful and ashamed and I wasn't smart as my mammy and sensitive to blame. She shouted, Kay, Jess. Auntie Kay is what's written. What do you think? She loved you. She was smitten. So you see, motorbike granny, my Nana Betty, went behind her family's back, adopted her sister's baby. Then her and her husband, fearing my mum would feel left out, adopted 3 other mixed race kids in 1960s Beaumont. Liz, Susan, Dermot Jr. and Anna. I still have 3, but not my mother. But fuck me, you should be there. When the cousins scattered afar, get drunk together, all beige and ambiguous, and wonder what the fuck we are. Padre Pio and rosaries. 4 black children, malevolence, generosity wielded the DNA of my family. Tragedy and circumstance, survivor mode, a state of mind, and unshook permanence. Inherited anxiety, inherited rage, inherited rebellion, inherited wisdom and sage, inherited connection to the women left behind in Hyde Park with survivor skin and a teenage mind. To a system against them, to a system we are told that's finished, irrelevant, but we know unresolved. To the most powerful man in our state, unable to spit an apology to families unstable. To the girls in blue. To the women in black. To the women who still wake up feeling attacked, know your sisters are close and they hold you while you sleep. That the known and the unknown, the memories we keep, and we will always hold you. We will hold your space for healing and love, for peace and grace. And when those Park A floors are gone, I will sing our song. In my DNA, I know something went wrong. And that will always drive me to do what's right. To the white, black, brown and blue girls. We have been born to fight. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jess. That I've heard it a few times and it still just moves me so much. And the first night you spoke it, I remember people were in tears in the room, survivors, and just everyone there was so incredibly moved by your words. And I remember the first time that we met in Dublin, you spoke about trying to find a linguistic arsenal to articulate the generational impact of these institutions on yourself and on your family. And we went together to the GRO, the General Register Office in Dublin, trying to find your mum's birth cert and to find out where she had actually been born. So, if you go in there, it's a pokey little place in the middle of the city, and people go in there to go leaf through ledgers with thousands of names, trying to find their own, to find a way around that secrecy and the fact that people don't have the right to their information still. So tell me about finding that linguistic arsenal and, how you sort of felt discovering that your mum was born in Castlepollard in Mother and Baby Home, which is run by the same order of nuns, the Sisters of the Sacred Hearts, that run Besport, where Noelle was born.
Wow.
So they ran 3 institutions in Ireland.
So we're just talking as well in the virtual green room there on the right that we can see. Also, my middle name was Noelle, so there you go. So it's all connected. I guess the way I always talked about my linguistic arsenal was because my mother is mixed race. My mother is half Nigerian, and we were talking about being the kind of the daughters of the dash, where my mother's birth cert, as we found in the GRO, where the father's name, there is a dash, and similar to my birth cert as well, my father's name, because in 1986, I guess I was still under the umbrella of illegitimate, which as we talked about before. And with the illegitimacy comes with not necessarily, but I think very commonly there is a dash where the father's name should be if there is a conception, God forbid, out of wedlock. But for me, really the linguistic arsenal came from being a kind of a light passing mixed race person, or a person who navigates within white spaces very easily, but who identifies as non-white or identifies as black. And kind of growing up, that was very difficult for me because my mother, who was raised by 2 white parents, and my aunties and uncles, who were also raised by 2 white parents, they also did not have the linguistic arsenal. They didn't have words like mixed race or biracial or anything like that. And even like talking to Rosemary about it as well, there's these very kind of intense ways that blackness was talked about back in the day, and it was usually negative. And so speaking to my surviving relatives who are of color, when you ask them, you know, how they perceive themselves and their identity, they say, well, I'm Irish. And that's it. And that's the way that they hold on to, not hold on to it, that's how they identify. And that's how they identify, and I will never take that away from them. For me, growing up in changing Ireland, changing Ireland, I kind of find a bit trite, but I don't really like that term. But like in a country where there was maybe more visibility for people of color, and people were having these particular ideas about Nigerians and ideas about Black people. And this was obviously really affecting me personally as a person who's of color and a Black person. And people were like, you don't have to worry, you're white. And I was like, I'm not white. I'm really not white. And they kind of like, oh, no, seriously, it's fine. It's fine. And that would get me so angry.
Mm-hmm.
And then to connect that with my mother, it was very hard to continue my story with my mother's story, because there was so much secrecy around the adoption, and a secrecy around her heritage and where she came from, and a secrecy even around them searching for their own roots and searching for their own background. And as Noelle talked about earlier on, a part of that is possibly the shame associated with it, and a part of that is also just the emotional distress and the emotional triggering that it causes to actually go through that process. But as a daughter and as a granddaughter of people who've experienced mother and baby homes and have come through that system, it's very much my history and very much the things that I wanted to know, but it also wasn't my place. It wasn't my place to find out my mother's roots. So to go to the GRO with yourself was amazing. And one of the things that I knew that was very helpful, obviously, is that my mother's born on New Year's Day. So that made it kind of easier. A little bit, because we found her obviously in the first 1956. We knew her maiden name because she was adopted back into the family, so it was the maternal side of my family. So I knew the maiden name of that, which is O'Neill, even though I'm a Kavanagh. And so I remember us finding the details and seeing the birth cert and being triggered by the first time I saw the birth cert when I was 13, which is in the poem, which I had forgotten about. I'd forgotten seeing that, and I forgot my mom kind of going like, me looking and seeing my grandmother's name and realizing that it was my incredibly overly affectionate grandaunt, who actually was my biological grandmother, and who was always called Auntie Kay, but it was actually my biological grandmother. But you were there with me, and you had these photos, and you talked about Casa Pollard. And Casa Pollard, from what I remember, our discussion was one of the good places. And these were places where you were sent to have your child, but there is a tendency to know that you would go home, that you wouldn't be kind of abandoned there. So you would have your child, you'd put it up for adoption, or it would be sent to an industrial school, whatever would happen, and then you would be sent back to your family. And you had photos of the place. And the emotion I felt to see those photos was incredible. And it was a sense of deep kind of terror and isolation, but also a huge sense of like empathy for what my grandmother went through, which was at I guess what her family wanted her to do. And that's why she did that. And sorry, go on.
No, go on.
But I was saying, but that was also, to tie in with that kind of stream of consciousness was, to think about her relationship, being this young woman who had this relationship with a Black man, who was a Nigerian medical student, and kind of this understanding that this was, this was always a fling. And Rosemary talked about this earlier on as well, this idea that these were flings, these were kind of, moments of stupidity. But like, we don't know that. They could have been romantic connections. These could have been relationships, but because they were interracial, they were never considered to be legitimate in themselves. And so they were always considered to be something that was nefarious almost, And I had huge empathy for her having this relationship that was potentially romantic with this man, and then being sent to this place in the middle of nowhere, feeling abandoned by her family to have this child. and how that must have felt for her. Yeah.
And I think that's so true. And you know, many of the women I spoke to did say, you know, it was someone I loved. Even Rose Mary, the woman who Siobhan read the piece about, she had actually, the father of her child, the second time she went to Tuam, you know, really wanted to stay with her and to keep her child and to, you know, raise a family. So I think that it was a lot more complex than this narrative that, you know, it was all just flings, or, you know, and even though women, you know, were sent to these institutions after experiencing sexual assault and becoming pregnant,
Yeah.
in tragic ways, very traumatic ways, there were also relationships, you know, that were very healthy and were broken apart through these institutions.
There was also love. There
Yeah.
was love, you know, and that has to be, because that love was taken away, and that love was taken away from the children as well, you know, who were put into orphanages, who had to go through those, you know, institutions. Is that, and it's something that I think has to be emphasized, is that we all came from love, you know, and that as you say, this republic of shame, these institutions, these networks of shame, they want to take away the love and put in shame, and that whatever happened, these unions that came together were shameful and they were sinful, but they weren't. They were moments, even at brief moments, a lot of them, obviously, except moments of assault and rape. The other, like, moments of connection, they came from love, and I hope that the women who are survivors can contemplate that.
And, you know, from speaking with mothers, even those who have kept this a secret and never spoken about it, and haven't reconnected with their children and are still holding on to the secret and the weight of that, the love is so clear, even if they didn't get a chance to spend much time with their child. They speak about every Christmas, every day, thinking of their child, you know, over years and decades. That connection never seems to end. And so that was something that, you know, just really made an impact on me, seeing, you know, how these women just still think of their child every day. And I think it's really important, you know, for people our age and even younger. I mean, Besport was open until 1998. The institution I mentioned in the beginning, the castle in Donegal, was open until 2006. So
Yeah.
when I was around 17, so this is something that could have affected our lives. I mean, we could have been sent to an institution like this. And like you said, the laws around illegitimacy only changed in 1987. So I was born just months after that changed. And
Yeah.
it really is still affecting, I think, our generation. And you know, for someone whose family has been impacted by this, and you know, it just really is all around us. The institution where your mother was sent as a baby and adopted from, St. Patrick's in Temple Hill, is right down, you know, the road from me. It's very close, and I used to walk by that every day. And just never knew what it was. So there's a whole landscape of, you know, institutional landscape that we're not aware of. The place where your aunt was adopted from, actually, yeah.
Yeah, and there was a moment where Noelle was doing the reading, and it brought me back to being in Hyde Park, and the poem, the beginning of the poem, Four Girls in Blue, that is about us sitting in assembly room, and you know, as a third year going into transition year, and looking at the different aspects of community service. And one of the community services were going to the old folks home across the road, and the old folks home across the road was not an old folks home, it was the forgotten women of Hyde Park who are still there. And the reason why they were trying to sell it to us was like, oh, they're kind of like teenagers, is because they had been institutionalized since they were teenagers. And they were still across the road in a smaller area of Hyde Park. And I think the rest of the land at that point had been sold off for estates and suburban semi-detached homes, which within themselves, in my area in Beaumont around Dublin 9, had their own stories of being haunted, and, you know, had their own kind of spookiness about them. And so, like, absolutely, those stories were still, we you know, when I was 16 in 2002, 2003, we were still being encouraged to go across the road from the Catholic girls' school over to literally across the road to Hyde Park. where these forgotten women were, who were now old and institutionalized. And I think that's also where my nana worked as a cook, where she smuggled in their cigarettes and makeup.
The rebel.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just speaking the other day to a woman whose story is in the book, and she was born in St. Patrick's in Dublin, the biggest mother and baby home in Ireland, and remained there really all her life. She lived there until she was in her 20s, was made to work in the wards, looking after the children, grew up there as a child, and then was sent off to Cork to a different order of nuns, and made to work in a Magdalen laundry for years and years. And she is still living there on the grounds of that laundry to this day. I spoke to her the other day, and she's an incredible woman. She knits these really colorful blankets, and she's a survivor, and she's incredibly resilient, but she's been institutionalized her whole life only because she was born in an institution. And her mom actually came to that institution once to try and see her, and the nuns wouldn't let them interact. And she said she just never forgave them for that. But yet there are still many women who are on the grounds of these institutions or in the custody of the religious orders. So this is really our present. It is not the past. I think you've articulated that so powerfully. So thanks, Jess. I think we'll bring everyone back in, and then we're going to wrap it up. Just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone. Thank you as well to Penguin Ireland and to the Gutter Bookshop who have hosted this event. But thank you, Rosemary, Siobhan, Noelle, Jess. This has really been an honor to spend this time with you, and thank you for sharing all your insights.
Thank you.
It is our honor to have you write such a powerful book that just completely encapsulates the experience of thousands and thousands of women of Ireland consigned to the dustbin of Irish society, sanctioned by the Irish state and the Catholic Church. It is misogynistic.
Oh, yes, 100%.
I can't even go there because it just fills me with incredible sadness. Not rage. I'd like to think I'm mature enough and I'm all grown up. It's not rage, but it is a sadness that so many lives were absolutely destroyed by a misogynistic religion and the Irish state.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
I think that's more powerfully than anyone, than I can definitely put it, and I'm quite speechless. Thank you so much, Rosemary. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks a million, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kaylin. You're the best.
Woohoo! Well done, lads.
I'm blushing here, lads.